Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really cutting through the noise around the US and China because, well, things have fundamentally changed.
They really have.
That fragile trade truce, the one
Yeah.
sort of holding things together, it officially collapsed. Basically, end of September, start of October 2025.
Yeah. Disintegrated is the right word.
And we're not talking washing machine tariffs anymore. This is like a full-blown strategic fight.
Yeah.
Chips, rare earths, export controls, the whole 9 yards.
That's exactly the shift. And it's so crucial for you, the listener, to grasp this. This is Trade War 2.0. It's deliberate, it's strategic.
Right.
It's about who controls the basic building blocks of the next industrial age. It's not just reacting anymore. It's economic warfare, trying to slow the other guy down.
I've noticed a lot of historical comparisons popping up, too. Makes you think analysts see this as, well, bigger than just an economic blip. That Thucydides trap idea keeps coming up.
It does, yeah. They're calling it the Thucydides trap reimagined. So the classic idea, rising power Athens or China now makes the established power Sparta, the U.S. nervous, and war becomes almost inevitable.
Right. Fear leads to conflict.
Exactly. But today, with nuclear weapons and global supply chains all tangled up, a shooting war is it's too catastrophic.
So the conflict shifts.
It shifts. It becomes this long, drawn-out economic fight, a battle for control over supply chains, tech standards, infrastructure, basically. It's literally war by other means.
But if it's economic, does that make it more survivable? Or just, I don't know, a slower burn that hurts everyone else caught in the middle?
That's the huge question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's definitely slower. But whether it's sustainable, that depends on politics, really. How much economic pain can people tolerate domestically?
Okay, we'll definitely get into that later.
Yeah. For now, the aim isn't really total victory. It seems more about building resilience, and denying the other side access to critical tech.
Okay, so let's paint the picture of the actual collapse. What happened in late September, early October that just blew that temporary truce apart?
Well, the U.S. kicked off this latest round. President Trump announced plans for, his words, massive increase in tariffs.
Massive, like.
We're talking potentially 100, maybe even 145% on certain Chinese goods. Things like EVs, steel, semiconductor parts, the future stuff.
Wow.
And crucially, they added 14 more Chinese AI companies to the entity list.
Which basically cuts them off from American tech.
Pretty much, yeah. Blocks their access.
That's a direct hit, targeting their future growth. So how did Beijing hit back? Immediately.
Oh, yeah, immediately and strategically.
Yeah.
They turned their own strengths into weapons. First, they slapped new, pretty hefty port fees on all U.S.-owned or flagged ships. That hit October 14th almost right away.
Okay, a logistical pain.
And then the really big one, the counterpunch to the entity list. They announced broad restrictions on exporting critical minerals.
Rare earths.
Bingo.
And you could see how serious this was just by looking at the markets, right?
Yeah.
October 10th, that reaction wasn't just noise.
No, it was pure panic that day. Global markets lost about $1.65 trillion in value in a single day.
1.65 trillion.
Trillion, yeah. The Dow dropped over 800 points, about 1.14%. And just to put that $1.65 trillion figure in context, that's like the entire yearly GDP of, say, Canada or Australia. Gone. Wiped out in hours.
That's staggering. That's not a correction. That's capital running for the hills. Where did it hurt most?
Exactly where you'd expect, given the fight. Semiconductor stocks, EV stocks, those got hammered globally. Investors piled into safer stuff like U.S. Treasuries. But the sheer volatility showed everyone this isn't temporary. It's a new structural reality.
Okay, so this leads us to that idea of strategic symmetry, mutually assured disruption, some call it. Does that hold up? What are the core weapons each side is using here?
It does hold up, I think, but it's sort of vertical. Depends on where you are in the tech stack.
Okay, explain.
America's weapon is at the very top of the stack. It's technology, it's finance, it's controlling access to the absolute cutting-edge AI chips, think NVIDIA H100s, and just as important, the super complex machinery, often from the Netherlands, actually, that you need to make those chips.
Right, the lithography machines, ASML.
Exactly. So the U.S. goal is to basically try and cap China's progress in high-end AI, because you just can't do it without these chips and tools.
So U.S. controls the brains, the really advanced stuff, and China's counter is down at the base of the stack. Materials.
Precisely. Atoms, not bits, you could say. China's leverage is its near-total dominance over processing raw materials, especially rare earth elements, REs.
That's the real choke point, isn't it? The processing.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Because that step, separating and refining these elements, is incredibly difficult, dirty, and expensive. China controls somewhere between 80 and 90% of global REE processing and the manufacturing of the high-strength magnets made from them.
Even though they don't have 80–90% of the actual reserves underground.
Right. They only have about a third of the world's reserves, but they invested for decades in building up the processing capacity, often when Western countries didn't want the environmental headache. That distinction processing, not just mining,
Yeah.
that's everything.
Why can't the U.S. and allies just, flick a switch and start processing their own if the reserves are elsewhere?
Well, it's tough. First, the cost is huge, billions in investment, and the environmental regulations around processing these things, they're really strict in the West for good reason. It creates nasty, toxic waste.
Okay.
Second, the actual know-how, the specialized equipment, the skilled workforce, it's all concentrated in China now. It takes time to build that up from scratch. That's why estimates say building a non-Chinese supply chain, especially for processing and magnet making, it's like a 5 to 7 year project, minimum,
Right.
even with government pushing hard.
5 to 7 years.
No.
That leaves a huge window of vulnerability right now.
A massive window. And these REEs, they're not needed in huge volumes, but they're absolutely vital. Think neodymium, dysprosium, terbium. They go into high-performance magnets.
Used in.
Everything important, basically. EVs, wind turbines, smartphones, but also critical defense systems. A single F-35 fighter jet needs 417 kilograms of rare earth elements.
417 kilos in one plane.
Yep. These elements allow magnets to be incredibly powerful, small, and work at really high temperatures. You just can't build modern military tech without them.
And China just turned up the heat on that dependency with this new 0.1% rule, right?
Exactly. They made it official. Any product made anywhere in the world that contains more than 0.1% of rare earth materials originating from China now needs explicit government approval to be exported. That starts December 1st.
Wow, that's extraterritorial.
It is. They're basically saying your advanced sensor made in Germany, if it uses even a tiny bit of our processed dysprosium, we get a say in whether it gets sold. It's a direct mirror to the U.S. entity list, targeting downstream products.
Okay, let's shift focus because this is where it hits home for you listening. What does this huge fight mean for, your wallet?
Yeah.
And for those big frothy industries like AI everyone's betting on?
Right, the domestic impact. In the U.S., the most immediate thing is inflation. Plain and simple. Tariffs are basically hidden taxes.
On consumers.
On consumers, yeah. Economists figure if these big tariffs Trump mentioned, sanction 100% or more, actually happen, the average household could see their yearly costs go up by maybe $1,200 to $1,500.
Ouch. On what kind of things?
Electronics, appliances, maybe cars eventually.
Yeah.
Anything using steel or imported components. It just feeds inflation. And, sustained inflation really tests people's patience, especially with elections always looming.
And beyond the everyday stuff, what about that AI boom? Everyone's pouring money in. Is this conflict going to, pop the bubble?
It's a definite risk to what some are calling the AI froth. You've got this massive $368 billion investment surge happening right now, mostly building huge data centers that need tons of GPUs.
Which need rare earths.
Which need components that rely on rare earth and other global supply chain inputs. If China seriously restricts REE exports or even just slows them down, it disrupts manufacturing. It could delay GPU production for months.
Adding costs.
Huge costs. Estimates suggest it could add maybe $75 billion to $100 billion in extra costs just to build out data centers over the next 5 years if this drags on. That kind of sudden cost jump.
Yeah, it absolutely threatens the sky-high valuations of some AI companies built on rapid, cheap expansion.
So there's the economic risk, the inflation risk. But the sources also point to this other vulnerability, maybe even bigger. The legal ground the U.S. is standing on with these tariffs. The Supreme Court wildcard.
Yes, this is a huge institutional challenge. The whole legal basis for these broad tariffs, the ones imposed using emergency powers, it's being challenged in court. And 2 lower courts have already said, essentially, Mr. President, you've overstepped your authority here.
Under which law specifically?
It's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA.
Okay, IEPA. Why is using that so controversial for broad tariffs?
Well, IEPA is usually meant for very specific things, like targeted sanctions against rogue states or terrorist groups, or during a genuine, sudden national crisis. It gives the president a lot of power, yes, but the argument is it was never intended as a tool to set long-term, sweeping trade policy for the entire economy unilaterally.
So the courts are pushing back on executive power versus Congress's power over trade.
Exactly. It's a fundamental separation of powers issue. They're saying Congress should be authorizing something this big, not the president using an emergency law indefinitely.
So what happens if the Supreme Court agrees with the lower courts? What's the fallout?
If the court strikes down the tariffs, it forces a big shift. It would signal a move back towards more traditional rules-based trade policy. The White House couldn't just slap on massive tariffs using IEPA anymore. They'd have to use other tools like Section 301 or Section 232, which are generally more targeted and require more justification.
And if the court sides with the White House,
Yeah.
upholds the tariffs.
Then it basically validates this very broad use of executive power in trade. It would likely accelerate the decoupling between the U.S. and China, lock in those inflationary pressures we talked about, and give this president and future ones a very powerful unilateral economic weapon.
So as this whole thing gets more entrenched, the global economy is kind of rearranging itself, right? Both sides are pushing for self-reliance. China wants its own chips. The U.S. is throwing money at building rare earth processing here.
That structural shift is really the core story long term. Companies aren't waiting around hoping for things to go back to normal. They're full speed ahead on the China plus one strategy.
Moving some production elsewhere.
Exactly. Shifting investment in parts of their supply chains to places like India, Vietnam, Mexico. It's not just about finding cheaper labor anymore. It's about building redundancy, parallel systems that can survive these geopolitical shocks.
If this fragmentation keeps going, say, deep into the 2030s, what does the world look like?
What looks increasingly like two separate, or at least semi-separate, digital and economic zones, these technospheres.
Technospheres.
Yeah. You'd have, sort of, a Western sphere built around U.S.-led AI, cloud computing, financial systems, software standards.
Okay.
And then an Eastern sphere, maybe centered on China's strengths, materials, manufacturing, logistics, possibly their own digital currency and internet standards.
A digital iron curtain, almost.
Could be something like that. And this transition, it's expensive and it's slow. Building that non-Chinese rare earth capacity takes 5-7 years. So until those new, more resilient supply chains are fully built out, probably well into the early 2030s, we just have to live with this friction, this disruption.
So wrapping this up, where does this leave us? It feels like the trade war isn't just about trade anymore. It's this deep digital industrial duel, fought with silicon chips on one side and, well, critical atoms on the other.
I think that's right.
And the goal might not even be winning in the old sense, but just building enough resilience, enough diversification to survive in a world that's breaking apart.
Exactly. And maybe this painful, expensive transformation, this forced shift towards fragmented, maybe more localized supply chains. Maybe it's the 21st century version of a cold peace.
The cold peace.
Yeah, a way to manage intense competition without actually going to war. So the final question really for you to think about is this. Is paying this price now, the inflation, the disruption, worth it? Will it ultimately make the global economy by, say, 2030 actually more secure and stable than the incredibly efficient but maybe dangerously fragile single-source global system we had before?
A painful path to stability, if that's even where it leads.
If that's where it leads, it's the big gamble.